Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. And today, our guest is Emily Mooney. Is that how you wanted me to introduce you? I forgot to ask you that.
That's it. That's perfectly. That is my name.
Okay. We had Teresa too on your profile, so I wasn't
Oh, that's
sure.
right. Yep. Yeah,
Uh,
that is. I had to change my name on a profile. I was working for the prison system, so I had to change my
oh,
name. And when that contract ended, then I opened up and used my real name again. And I go by Emily Mooney. So
okay, cool. Okay, good. Well, on that note, please, if you could just sort of tell us a little bit about yourself, a little background.
sure. I grew up in Michigan in an agricultural community. I'm the youngest of five. Kind of interesting history. My mother's family, although we didn't know anything about her because her real mother died when she was 2, and her family was more fractured. She didn't know her history at all, but I've started to become interested in genealogy
Mm,
because I come from more of a reincarnation perspective. And but I grew up in a Roman Catholic dogma, and so there was a lot of push pull, a lot of sort of forcing of that dogma. Even when it was my time to be confirmed and make my decision as an adult, it wasn't okay in my family to not accept that dogma. So I really didn't have a choice. And in my life, anytime anybody restricts me, it just makes me want to do it more. And so I wasn't even really allowed to explore other dogmas, other Protestant dogmas. So even as a kid, I just was dubious of the intention there. I mean, why would anybody ever try to censor information? So it never felt authentically mine, and it didn't always resonate with universal truth. And I did start singing in the church, and it opened up a passion that I didn't realize I had. Uh, and so I stayed in the church longer because of the musical experience. But when that was over, I still couldn't use it as my faith fully. And later learned that, perhaps my brother who passed very prematurely at the age of 47 from the cumulative effects of addiction may have been touched by clergy abuse in our very
oh,
town.
wow.
But this particular offender hasn't officially made the list. Um, I see signs that perhaps he had been affected in that way, as a lot of men did die of addiction or suicide,
Mm,
because that type of a molestation is so harmful to a child's soul. It's they're groomed. It's not like they're necessarily beaten up and raped. So you're really, really tricking a child.
mm.
Often they're threatened, or family members will be threatened if they tell. And so I do believe there's a chance my brother had that secret for a very long time.
Mm.
And so, but over the years, so he's been gone about 10 years, I've been feeling his spirit get more and more powerful. There were instances in my childhood of clairaudience.
Oh,
Clairaudience is a clear, when we talk about the psychic senses, a clairaudience means clear hearing. And as a child, I remember struggling, feeling like the black sheep, feeling like the girl that did not fit into the three girls. And 3 is a bad number in women. And I was always kind of a weird kid, attracted to death. I'd have prophetic dreams about who might die in the family.
huh.
And when I talked about it, it may be seen as being dramatic or negative, and so I was shut down there. But over the years, more and more experiences happened. Even being on vacation and being directed to speak to a certain individual, and it turns out I'm staying in her grandfather's condo, and things like that started to unveil themselves in my life, where I was starting to piece it together and realize, wow, this thing that I've always admired, maybe it's starting to happen in me. And surely it did. I left a 20-year profession in the pharmaceutical industry because I wasn't using the spiritual gifts that I feel like God called me into nursing to use. I was just being swayed by the big money in big pharma, because nurses are historically underpaid. And so I had to work on my fear of money. And I had to let go of my fear of money. And that's the first thing I did. Sorry. Anything in your life that is blocking you or killing your spirit has to be examined and healed and removed to be in creator flow, I believe. And I was in a long-term marriage that had some of the same problems that I was running from my childhood. And the reason I picked him perhaps is because he was familiar. Psychologically speaking, we are often as humans wired to find patterns comfortable, whether they're healthy or not. And so I was kind of torn about ending a 24-year relationship with the father of my two children. And so it was just one change after another. I left a career in pharmaceutical, went back to nursing after 25 years of being away from patient care, and had a clairaudient experience then. I was doing some soul coaching, which is like life coaching, goals and stuff, career goals, healthy lifestyle, but with the added element of spiritual soul work, or learning what the difference between ego and higher consciousness and creator flow feels like, learning how to control the false self or the egoic response. But I had been making such good money in the pharmaceutical industry. He said, it's going to take you a long time to build up clientele, perhaps. So you might need to get a part-time job to dovetail with your soul coaching until your clientele builds up. But in doing the soul coaching training, I realized I hadn't done the soul coaching for myself. I hadn't removed those barriers. I hadn't left what was a damaging relationship to me between a narcissist and an empath. Was so destructive to me that when I left that, which was also a completely different culture to me, like an Eastern European communistic culture, for this small town, farm girl. Although we fell in love, the culture was so important and his was so much more overpowering. I lost myself entirely. And so when I was trying to decide what to do for part-time work and not really wanting to go back to the hospital, because I had always hated hospital nursing, I was just making my bed one day, and that's when I got my next, probably the fourth clairaudient experience I've had in my life. I wasn't thinking about work. I was just making the bed, and I heard hospice. It did echo in the room. I heard it with my human ears, and I looked around, and no one was there. And I'm open. I was starting to try to open up my clairs anyway, so I was like, sweet. So I got online, and there was an open interview for a hospice organization the very next day, just 10 miles away from my home, and they hired me on the spot.
Oh,
And they were sensitive to the fact that I've been away from patient care for so long, and frankly, I was too. But I was following what I felt was creator flow and creator directive. And when she asked me what makes you feel qualified to work with patients after all these years, it was almost like a claircognizant download. So claircognizance is another clear knowing. Sometimes I will just say a phrase or a funny joke, and I don't feel like it's me. It makes me look very wise. It just comes very fast, and but I found out that I can channel. So I've been channeling lately on a wisdom app. It's a wisdom community. It's an Apple platform right now. And what's nice about it is it's a meta platform. So you can like minds find each other, and it's not a hostile environment where I'm not trying to convince anybody ever. I just want to share experiences. So I did take that directive. And when she asked me, what makes you qualified, I said, I have the heart, and I have the compassion and the empathy that can't be taught. I just have to relearn the technical skills of bedside nursing. And she loved that. She's just like, oh, you're right. We can't teach the hospice heart. And I was like, sweet, where'd that come from? Because I didn't feel that confident. And I feel like spirit and angel guides can work through us to give us that go-go juice we need sometimes when we're uncertain or faltering or have fear. And ever since I learned how much we can access our guardian angel, and I've been aware of how archangels, powerful angels, may dive bomb on our path when we need a little extra protection or care. I lean into my angelic team now like I never have, and I just wish I'd taken them off the unemployment line so much sooner. Um, there's so much spiritual support for us, and we need it down here, right? Because the veil is so thick, it can feel like we are just spiritually floundering with a blinder on and getting poked by a lot of pokey stuff. Empathically, I've always been super sensitive to this place. I was actually always, I think, maybe seen as a pain to my family, who would tell me, hey, you're too sensitive. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, why am I so weird? Why am I such a misfit? But those sensitivities, just like a lot of things that we may label as bad, are gifts, really, in the end. Even mental illness. A lot of people with bipolar disorder are amazing artists or musicians or something else, you know?
True.
Um, so I've learned not to judge a book by its cover. You can't tell how good the book is till you get to the end, right? So I just take
Ye-
these spiritual breadcrumbs that come, and it's led me to some amazing things. And my brother on the other side, actually through hospice, coordinated me to go to an area of Detroit that is not mine at all, and I don't like to go because it's right inner city, and it's less safe in Detroit. It just is. I tend to follow the
Mhm.
stop signs. That is not the culture there. You are immediately identified as an alien, especially if you're a white girl in a little Prius following the stop sign. So I always prayed for protection. I always sort of bargained with my God, like, hey, I'm helping your people in their most vulnerable moments. Please don't let me get carjacked. You know?
So what is your spirituality? What would you say?
uh,
So I'm sorry. So
so I left the Roman Catholic dogma and I threw the baby out with the bathwater. And the problem with, like, leaving something that's very dogmatic and disciplined is if you don't kind of fill that void with something, then you're sort of untethered. And I was. And I had to relearn a more positive framework for my higher power because I had been taught a lot of shame and fear. Now, the Catholic Church has changed quite a little bit, but in 70s and 80s and 90s, that's the Catholic Church I got. And it
Mhm.
was very fear filled and shame based. And I noticed that my hospice patients who came from that particular dogma were always very afraid of death more than people who didn't even believe in anything
Yep.
because they were so afraid of the judgment day, and being good enough. Were they
Mhm.
good enough? And it broke my heart. um it's too bad when these things that are supposed to help us actually hinder us spiritually, and everybody needs to find their own path. I don't want to dog any dogma, but I don't think it's right to force a dogma that doesn't resonate, because as far as I know right now, I have this one life, and I need to find the rituals and the dogma that resonates with me. So I
Mm.
left that church, and then I went to a Christian based Bible church, but I couldn't tell them about my clairs. So I felt inauthentic in the Christian-based Bible church, and then I just started grappling with the scraps, like the prodigal son, and I had a little trouble. I had a little addiction journey that I want to be honest about, because it's something that has kind of come and gone in my life. It seems to come some at stressful times, but I want it out of my life for good, because it's like touching a hot stove. It may come and go, but one day it might not go, and your
Mm.
willpower might not be enough. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I should have locked this one up.
No, that's okay.
This orange
It's
cat,
okay.
I saved him from an abusive home, and he's
Oh.
been a little warrior Celtic god cat to me. This Finnegan. Um, so then I started looking into kind of the spiritualist church, but that kind of wasn't enough either. So I am a weird amalgam. I
Okay.
cherry pick from anything that resonates with universal truth. Universal truth to me is love and light. And I think that as long as we remember what we learned in first grade, the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. I think that surpasses any of the sort of specifics of any dogma.
And you mentioned you feel like you have this one life. So does that mean you don't buy into reincarnation?
No, I just believe that I'm supposed to concentrate on this life, because
Okay.
this life is hard enough. But I do have special insights, and some of what I saw at hospice deathbeds just confirmed to me, that eh, we are eternal energy, and we go on, and our personality doesn't dissipate. There does seem to be that we retain our personality, and the people that have crossed and the people that have had near death experiences. I've been studying near death experiences since I was 16 because I was so afraid of death,
Mm.
and wondering too why I had insights about death, and why I
Right.
had, told my mother I wanted to be a mortician in third grade, which is weird. That's weird.
It's a
Something
little
has always kind
unusual.
of, yeah. And so, getting into hospice was sort of, my friends were like, of course, you'll love this. And I was like, what do you mean? They said, well, you volunteered for hospice and you did all this other stuff for hospice. And I kind of compartmentalized those experiences. So my God has been
Mm.
trying to get me to hospice for a long time. And when I
Mhm.
did, that's when my brother arranged for me to meet a nurse medium at a deathbed at a house I wasn't supposed to be at in Detroit.
How did
And
he do that? How do you heard? Did
well,
you?
so this is what they say. They say that our loved ones on the other side, they don't necessarily become ascended masters just because they lost their meat suit, but they very much care about you and they'll be there for you at the finish line. But some members of our family might be a special guide to us as part of their healing journey. And that makes a lot of sense to me. My brother, Pat, dying of addiction, being kind of my special mortal angel who has struggled off and on with a, garden variety beer addiction. I mean, addiction is addiction is addiction. It's just some are a more super highway to death than others, and he chose the
Mm,
super highway to death.
mm.
And that was another thing. Like I knew he was going to die, and I told
Oh,
everybody he was. And again, oh, you're just being dramatic, and he did.
you sensed
And
it.
but now he's a special link on the other side, and he shortens the bridge for me.
Do you hear
Um,
him at ever? Because I know you have clairaudience, but is it or
I haven't
sensing
heard him.
him?
No, I sense him very much. He speaks to me through music. He sends nature to me.
Hmm.
There's this I don't know, there's many instances of just like on a holiday, looking out my backyard and like there's a duck right there and it just flies like right at me, but then turns, just weird animal behavior, funny behavior, and he's funny.
Hmm.
But yeah, he sends me messages through music when I was grieving hard. That's how he got through to me. And I was actually okay with his death because he was suffering in that body.
Hmm.
He had
Hmm.
terrible lung disease from snorting the stimulant for decades and
Oh,
smoking and working in a dusty warehouse and all. So his health was bad. He was chained to oxygen. And so when he died, initially I said, "Oh, good, you're out of that meat suit and you're radiant now." And I do believe
oh.
we go on. I
How did
didn't.
he? So how did he end up leading you to the medium RN?
Well, so this is what happened. So I got called to this death and I wasn't supposed to be there. A nurse was sick. I had trouble getting into the place because the patient was bedbound, deaf, and blind, and his wife had passed and he had no children. And we weren't aware of any family that he had. So I was like, oh no. They said, oh, ring the neighbor. She'll let you in. So I did that. And she's like, oh, honey, just go down the hall. It's open. It was like a high rise senior citizen building in Metro Detroit. And
Okay.
then she took off and I went down there and the door was locked. And I was like, oh no,
What?
because I knew he was actively dying, but that can take a couple of days. So I was like, oh gosh, how am I going to get into this apartment? And I had a clairaudient experience then. It said knock anyway.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, that's weird. Okay, knock, knock. And then this nurse answered with scrubs on, and her hair was really red and curly, and she had this most powerful presence. It hit me like a tidal wave because I'm sensitive to energy. And she was on the phone. She was distracted. She wasn't even engaging me, but her presence was just like, like I took notice. She
Hmm.
just let me in and walked into a side bedroom because she was talking on the phone. And I walk in and he is dead and he is dead, dead, and he's been dead. Like rigor mortis is setting in.
What?
And I'm like,
Okay.
oh no, he's already passed. I wasn't expecting this. I thought we had some time. So I'm filling out my forms. She finally comes out of the bedroom. I get to a question, and this is inner city Detroit. This is not my area. Every county, every city is a little different in their nuances with how they handle
Mm.
retrieving the body and all, and the questions that you ask. So on this form, it said, was this death witnessed? She sits down. She's very intent. She's still very powerful, but very silent. She's like ready. She's ready for me. And she's wearing scrubs. I'm like, why is a nurse here? I don't
Mm.
know any other agency that's working with this patient. So I'm starting to get a little, not detective mode, but definitely like things are not like I'm
Curious.
used to. And I said, was this death witnessed? And she said, and she looked off, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. She looked off. She's formulating her thoughts. It's taking way too long for a yes or no answer. And she said, she looks at me. She goes, no, but they said he was going to pass today. I said, they? And she said, yes, spirit. I'm a medium, and so are you. There's a 47-year-old man standing behind you with his hand on your shoulder. Does that mean anything to you? And that was like 5 years since my brother passed. And I was just starting to get a little past the acute grief. And I said, yeah, that sounds exactly like my brother, Pat. And she said, well, he's dancing in spirit with my uncle in law because it's no coincidence that we met today. He has been trying to let you know that you have these gifts and that you're supposed to work together to help others. And I just still wasn't really, when something so wild happens, it's hard to absorb it.
Hmm.
And then, so what was really funny is, and what was really beautiful is he passed already. But something I do for my hospice patients when they're comatose is I'll sing the Irish Celtic song of farewell.
Mm.
It's an old hymn, But the Catholic Church has put words to it that fit some of their scripture. And I will sing that song because it's beautiful. It's about the angels. Could I sing just a little tiny bit?
Sure. I was a
May
little
the
curious.
angels welcome you to paradise. May the mortals greet you on your way. May you see the face of the Lord this day. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And then the verses are, I am the resurrection and the light. And those who, believe in me, will never die. And so it talks about, the martyrs and the angels greeting you. And it's a beautiful homecoming song. So I sang that for her relative who was already deceased. I said, I do this usually earlier, but is it okay? And she said, absolutely. And we had a little memorial service for her loved one. And then they invited me to the memorial service. And, I felt a little nervous. I was definitely, me and her were the minority. We were the only two white folk there. It was a African-American and a Mexican family. And they were the most welcoming. I knocked on the door and her husband answered. And I said, hi, I'm Emily. I was the hospice nurse. And he's like, I know who you are. And I was like, oh, and he's like, but that was a sign of respect. And as soon as I came in, everybody knew who I was because she had played that little snippet at his service.
Oh, no.
And so it was
Wow.
just, and that's what I love about hospice is like the wrapping up of a life, the wrapping up of a really hard sojourn. We don't get off
Mm,
this pokey planet without big wounds, little wounds, sometimes catastrophic wounds.
Yep.
And we can wonder why we're being punished. Sometimes if we believe in certain dogmas that may say, oh, this is or karmic or whatever, you held on to unforgiveness, whatever it could be.
Mhm.
Um, I just believe that God does his best work when we're our most broken. And when I was working with those hospice patients, I was going through that divorce and it turned into a terrible divorce.
Mm.
And I felt hated by
Oh,
my family of origin, by my kids somewhat, because I was the one that pulled the trigger, by him definitely, because I was taking assets. And hospice was the one place I didn't feel hated. And I helped them and they helped me. And they helped confirm my mediumship abilities. It's been a beautiful thing.
wow. Um, I'm just curious. I've heard of shared death experiences. Have you heard of that before?
Can you help me define that for me? Because maybe I just don't know the term.
Well, um, some loved ones, and I've heard of also some hospice help when someone passes on, they can they experience their passing with them, almost like a near-death experience.
I have not heard of that.
Okay, I was just so curious. How long have you been doing hospice work?
Well, 5 years before the pandemic started. Um,
5. Okay.
I did have a really interesting energy transference that happened between me and a patient once that I recognize now because it actually happened when I was singing that same song to my favorite aunt who passed. I started singing the angel song and I started like people noticed my vibrato was no longer gentle. It was coming out really forcefully and they look up at me and I was shaking so hard.
Really? Okay.
And I was determined to get through that song because I love that aunt. She loved that song and I was going to do it. And I was nervous. I wasn't used to singing in public. And I thought, oh, this is weird. This is like the worst stage fright I've ever had. But it was more than that. I realize now. I was trembling so hard. My mother actually came up from the uh, whatever, the audience at a funeral. What do you call that? And my aunt,
Congregation? I don't know.
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was a funeral home. So the visit, whatever, the viewing area, and her husband came and they held me, and they said it felt like 1,000 volts of lightning were going through me. And as soon as I got done with that song, it just went away, and I was like, whew, that was weird, and
Yeah,
I
that's
felt a little
interesting.
embarrassed. And they were gracious. It's grief and stage fright maybe, but then when I got into hospice, I had a patient. He was so funny. He was like, do you know that documentarian Michael Moore? And he looked just like him too. And he was witty like him. And he was pleasantly confused in his dementia, but he was passing actually of cardiac issues. But he had a little confusion.
Mhm.
And so he was always very jolly. And I came to visit him one day and he was not jolly. He was tearful and he was fretful.
Mm.
And so I held his hand and I said, "What's the matter?" We talked a little bit. And I had just been to Lilydale, that mediumship community in New York, to try to help my mother get a little bit of peace after my brother's death. I thought,
Mm.
boy, surely we'll get a good reading if we go to this community.
Mhm.
But we didn't get a great reading. He'd only been past a year, and because of his traumatic death, she said, sometimes it takes a little while on the other side for spiritual recovery enough that
Yep.
they even have the strength and the ability to learn to communicate with us, because they have to lower their frequency to interact with our lower frequencies, and people who are sensitive have to raise their frequencies and such to bridge that gap. So we did not get a great reading, but I was thinking of him at Lilydale. And now I've learned, like my brother did, sometimes spirit on the other side can arrange our landscape so we run into certain people or certain pieces of literature so
Okay.
that a bigger mission can be accomplished. So when I realize now in retrospect, and a lot of stuff is hindsight in hospice, because you piece it together after with the death and all.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of him there. I think spirit, when we went to Catholic church, I remembered he was Catholic, and I took a picture of that hymn that I thought he would enjoy. It was seemed out of the blue that I would think of him on that trip with my mother. But when I saw him that week, he happened to be fretful, and I knew I had that song, so I sang it. And it
Mhm.
was a February day in Michigan, very cloudy. We barely get any sun. It's amazing we don't get rickets,
Mm.
like the Russians do. There's so little sun in Michigan
Hmm.
around the Great Lakes area. And it was a cloudy day and he was fretful. And I said, "Can I, Michael, can I sing this song for you?" And he said, "Okay." And he was looking out the window and he had tears coming down his cheeks. And I just took his hand. Touch is so important to everyone always. Touch is so important that a baby's brain won't even develop normally if they don't get the touch. So
Yeah.
it's always important. And in America, we're so afraid of death because we relegate it to the nursing homes, and so we don't see it. And so if we have to go see death because it's our loved one, we don't like it because it reminds us of our own mortality and a lot of stuff we're afraid of. And
Mhm.
we certainly don't want to touch it. So really, if you have
Yeah.
someone who's passing, the best gift you can do is just hold their hand and listen, or tell them exactly what you want to say. Even if they're in a comatose state,
Mhm.
the hearing is the last thing to go. Tell them. If there's something you want to say it. If they're still breathing, you got time, you'll have the closure. And sometimes it'll give them the permission and the closure they need to go with the spirits who have come to help bring them over to the other side. To go, I've seen favorite horses come to the bedside.
Wow.
I've
That's
seen,
cool.
yeah, religious symbols. It seems to be whatever the patient is going to find most comfortable to help
Okay.
them make that leap, because
Uh-huh.
while the body is dying, it's a process like labor and delivery. And I'll know whether they're dying based on their breathing and how it changes and how rapid it is.
Mhm.
Sometimes the vital signs aren't so important though. I've learned sometimes they'll have the most deplorable vital signs, but they'll live forever until someone comes up from Florida and they get to say their goodbye, and
That's
then boom.
amazing. I've
But
heard of that.
families will say, "What's the vital signs? What's the vital signs?" I'll say, "I'll take it." But first of all, it's a little uncomfortable for the patient. We're not going to do anything with that information, and it doesn't always mean anything, because the I've learned that we must have more control about when we leave our bodies than we have been taught.
I totally agree. I've
Mm,
learned now.
yeah.
Yep.
So when I did that song for him, all of a sudden the clouds parted and these birds came, like a
What?
flock of 20 birds. And this is
How
February. Like,
beautiful.
we're not getting our birds back quite yet, or they might be starting to migrate. But even in his, pardon me, his demented state and in his agitation, which was terminal agitation, he was going to die a week later. I just didn't know it yet.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
he smiled. His mood was lifted. I got done with the song, and I had noticed the birds too, but I was doing my work, right? And
Yeah.
he looked over at me and he goes, "Oh, honey, you brought the birds." And we laughed. And it was such a nice moment. And
Wow.
I was
Yeah.
able to help him. I felt effective. He was happier. I was going to come back in a couple of days to see why there was the change.
Mhm.
Because sometimes when they have a change and it's confusion or fretfulness, they either have an infection. That's sometimes the first thing we see with people with dementia or the elderly,
Okay.
or it's terminal agitation and they're getting ready to decline.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
Again, his
Huh.
family, I think, arranged for me to come back on the certain day, which happened to be Good Friday. Good Friday. I decided to come because it was going to be a long holiday weekend, but he didn't seem that close to death the last time I was there. You can be actively dying, for, even up to 2 weeks sometimes. It just
Sure.
depends on what your baseline was and how many reserves you have, physically.
Right.
So I just happened to come, and his daughters just happened to come at the same time. And
Mm.
we walk in and he's actively dying. And no one has had that information relayed to them from the facility yet because it's kind of new.
Mm.
And so they're upset. They're already anticipatorily grieving. I'm surprised, but now his agitation a week prior makes more sense.
Yeah.
And so I decide I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay with them until he passes because I can tell by his breathing it's probably going to be a couple of hours. And in hospice, we have that luxury. We can arrange our day to spend the time with the people that need it the most. And
Hmm.
I asked the daughters if I could say a prayer and sing the Celtic song of farewell that I just sang to you. And they said, yes, yes. Oh, we'd love that. Yes, yes. They were so bereft. And I put my hands on his hands and I started to sing the song. And again, that weird, like vibratory energy transference that Aunt Donna had sent me at her
Oh,
funeral, but
yeah.
a little less, so that I thought maybe it was just, again, stage fright or doing something so personal at such a personal time in a family's life and being self conscious. But it was more than that. I feel like I was literally maybe doing a little bit of that shared experience that you talk about. Actually, now that you give me the language for it, I was literally feeling some of the energetic, vibratory elevation that he was currently experiencing. He was actively dying with his unconscious, with his mouth agape, no longer communicating, but still tethered his soul. Our souls are tethered to our meat suits by the silver cord. This is what the Bible talks about it. Hospice nurses sometimes will see a little poof or a little dust or a little
Yeah.
fraying of that cord.
Yeah.
And I was literally like touching his mortal body as he was getting and I got that weird transference. And when I was done, I was a little embarrassed because, again, that was before I met the medium at the bedside. That was a year prior.
Oh.
And the daughters, I said, I'm sorry, I usually do better on that song. I must be a little nervous. And they're like, no, we think that was more. And they gave me a safe place to talk about those ideas. And they were so grateful.
Yeah.
And he died just a few minutes later at around the time they say that Jesus died. It was Good Friday.
Oh.
It's those kind
I
of beautiful.
I mean, when you're describing it, I'm getting goosebumps when you're talking about something about when you're saying his frequency is sort of raising because he's transitioning, and that's
Right.
I've heard that, yeah, we're kind of at a lower frequency here in this physical, and then we do kind of it raises our frequency somehow when we
Yeah.
transition and continues to evolve and it speed up, I guess. I don't know what the name of it is.
Well,
The
and they'll
frequency
talk
gets
about
higher.
tunnel and the light, and as soon as the soul concentrates on that light and they have the intention to be with that light, they're there instantaneously.
Mm.
But here's something dangerous that is hypothesized that can happen. And one
Uh-oh.
of the reasons maybe we get, pardon me, these trapped souls or these ghosts.
Oh, on
Um,
Earth?
if I'm a student of Roberta Grimes. She was someone who also started off in Catholicism, went to Protestantism, and then didn't know where she was. But she'd had a couple of white light experiences where she was reminded of the presence of God. And she's always had an attraction to Thomas Jefferson. She ended up channeling one of his books in a week. And that's what can happen. Like, we can
Oh,
have spiritual mentorship on the other side in the form of historical figures or saints that we were always attracted to.
hmm.
I have always been an animal lover. I've the unconditional love I felt like I was lacking in my childhood, I could often get from the animals on our farm.
Mm.
And to this day, I'm very empathic and I can communicate with animals. And I've always, St. Francis of Assisi was the same way. Birds would
Wow.
land on his crown chakra. I've had weird wildlife things happen at my home, and I live in the city. I live, and I had a red fox just curled up in the middle of my backyard. And I've been singing and doing my meditation and clearing my house of negative energies. And I was joking with my mom. It's like I'm Snow White, I'm bringing all the woodland creatures.
Yeah.
But there's something there. That's why animals are very good BS detectors, especially for
Yeah.
single ladies that are dating. Like, first of all, don't let them come to your house for a while. But once you trust them, trust your animals first because they can't be BS'd by love bombing. they can only use their spidey senses. So I had a
Interesting.
cat who would not let a man with a personality disorder ever touch her. And this is a really funny story. Okay, so after the deathbed mediumship RN experience where she said, "You are too," and she became my mentor. But then the
Oh,
pandemic hit, and so I had to step away from this for a little while. But that night, I went home to my apartment and I invited this gentleman over and I was telling him about this great experience. And he was one that he is not open to those ideas. So he was
okay.
debating with me that that is not true, that that does not happen, that is woo woo garbage.
Okay.
And my light, my light was just feet away and it flicked off and it turned
Okay.
back on. And it was soft, off and on. And I'm like, woohoo, that's spirit. See, that's spirit. And he's like, no, no, that's just a shorten your cord. I'll prove it to you. And he went over and he put his hands on the lampshade and the gentle turning on and off stopped and it went like a strobe light really fast. And he screamed like a little chicken and he ran off.
Hilarious. What?
And the next day, the RN medium called me to see how I was doing after the death. And I thought that was a funny role reversal. Usually I'm the one that calls the family to see how they're doing after a death. And she said, I know that, things were revealed and I just wonder how you're feeling about things. And I was like, well, I do have a light experience to share with you. And she said, that is actually this loved one who passed. His name was Santos. That is actually his sister, Maria. She is thanking us both for helping him because she was so worried about him. He
Oh,
was blind and deaf congenitally.
oh
So
my
she was
gosh.
always his protector until his wife, until he married. And then she died and she was his protector again, but she had just passed. So
Mm.
she was thanking me and also warning me that this gentleman was not a safe individual. And it turned out to be very true. And
Mm.
fortunately, I was not harmed. But that's how I have to chuckle. And I have to really love working in hospice because you help them, they help you, and it can come in the form of some spiritual badassery on the other side that you aren't even aware these people are checking on you and making sure you're okay.
Wow.
But they're grateful and they'll show
Yeah.
you gratitude.
This has been such a fun conversation, and there's more I wanted to ask you, but before we run out of time, I want to make sure and give you a chance to share any projects you're working on. And I want the listeners to be able to connect with you because I do know you have a few things to
Oh,
share.
thank you. Yeah, this pandemic has been really difficult for me. I left hospice and I got COVID in hospice, and I was sick for 7 months with that first wave in March of 2020, and the Detroit area was such a hot spot.
Mm.
I'd been as an admission nurse in all those nursing homes, admitting patients and spending way more than 15 minutes at the bedside. So I got very sick and it lasted a long time. I stayed at home, but it took about 6 months to recover. I got terrible GI problems that lasted and lasted for months.
Is it like long haul? Is that what that's
It was the
called?
long haul GI COVID, where you very much did need toilet paper. That was a real thing I discovered.
Mm. Oh,
They underestimated the GI stuff in China because not everybody got the lung type,
right.
So anyway, I got into when I got better, I thought I was immune. So I got into the hospital and I helped on the COVID ward. And that's when I got it again and ended up having a big PTSD experience that hurt me. But actually,
Oh,
it's what's beautiful. And I've learned is sometimes trauma will open up your clairs so that you're more sensitive. That's why near
huh.
death experiencers sometimes will come back with extra gifts. So
Lots of times.
so this crisis has made me realize I no longer want to work using my nursing skills in any sort of corporate structure. I'm going to start my own
Okay.
LLC. And I want to start caring for these nurses. I want to start caring for the caregivers because
Mm,
no one is caring for the caregivers and they're just quitting from exhaustion.
mm,
So I'm starting Angels RN, like registered nurse, Angels RN healing retreats. But it's
oh,
a double
wow.
entendre because if you spell RN, registered nurse, as ARER, so angels are
Are.
in healing.
Oh,
And I want to do body, mind, spirit. We are body, mind, and spirit. I want to get back to what nursing is, which is preventing the disease in the first place and then treating it holistically as much as possible afterwards. Because all these drugs, they give us something and they take something away. So
Yeah.
until I have my business up and going, and until my own COVID self is healed, because my immune system is tattered now. I get an infection like every other week. I had to
Wow.
give up my at home nurse job on the computer because of my COVID fog has really affected my ability to retain information to put it into a complex computer system. But I'm just staying open. I feel like I'm in creator flow when I connect with people through mediumship abilities now. It's
Mm.
as if my creator is like, okay, don't worry about it. We got this. We want you doing this anyway. And in order to heal the hospice heart that couldn't help those pandemic victims die peacefully, then I want to help their families connect with them through evidential mediumship. And I've just started seeing spirit. But until I'm fully developed, I've just been doing these wisdom talks, which is an Apple platform. It's a nice meta platform where there's no censorship. It's not like Facebook where they're censoring you. This is just wisdom is like minds finding each other. And you can start your own podcast. You can invite guests up for a conversation. It's not video.
Hmm.
And you can block people if they're offensive, but it's not an offensive community. It seems to be a more mature community that
Okay.
allows space for different ideas and reasonable social discourse, which I think we have lost in this country and on
Mm.
social media in
Mm.
general. So, Emily Mooney, RN. I'm a podcaster on wisdom.
Okay.
You can follow me on there. You can also find me on Instagram at Emily Mooney _RN, like registered nurse. I
Okay.
use I'm not totally set up yet. I'm using Instagram just as a way for you to talk to me because you can't talk on wisdom unless you come up live and talk in my room. So,
Okay.
but I'm very much interested in collaborating with like minds. I'm very much passionate about teaching, especially American culture, that death shouldn't be feared, that we are
Yes.
eternal, spiritual, powerful beings, and that we live on. But right now, we have to concentrate on this 70 years or 80 years in this meat suit and, do our best. And when we don't do our best, then we apologize and we do better tomorrow.
Well, I was going to ask you if I wanted to give you the last words because that sounded like great wisdom right there.
Yeah.
But okay, and I will be putting all of your links up in the video description for everybody watching. Don't worry, I'll put
Mhm.
those up for you.
Thanks. And
Um,
if wisdom and you don't want to download another app, I can be found on Facebook as M Teresa. And I do post my wisdom talks on there. So if you're a Facebooker and you're good with
oh,
that, you can find me there. It just doesn't tend to be they haven't censored me yet with my talks on Facebook. I'm surprised. The other day I put a quote up that I thought was C.S. Lewis, and it wasn't actually C.S. Lewis's quote, but it was still a positive message and they blocked it.
huh. That's just so strange. I don't know how that works, but
Well, that's nice.
um,
These meta platforms give us more freedoms.
yeah, yeah. Well, so cool talking with you. Wow, I had no idea. I didn't know a whole lot about you, but I really appreciate getting to know you and your story that is seems to be evolving and you're just growing
Yep, it's
still. I mean,
beautiful. Yep.
so so wonderful. I've loved chatting with you. So thank
You're
you for
doing a great
taking.
thing. You know what got me less afraid of death was listening to Sandra Champlain. Have you heard her on
Oh yeah.
YouTube? We Don't Die Radio.
Yep.
And she had some of the same sort of upbringing that I did. So, and she's really evolved over time. But I got to meet her at a conference in Scottsdale, and I said, "Hey,
Oh,
you're the reason I can do hospice nursing. Thank you." She
wow.
helped me. She helped
Okay.
bring information into my life that made me fear death less.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm hoping these kinds of conversations are just going to be increasing. This is going to be a more of a normal uh, topic. These kinds of topics. It should be.
When there's trauma, people always turn back to other ancient wisdoms. They're always more open to other modalities that have been suppressed. So
Mm,
this is the time. And a lot of
it is.
mediums are breaking open really fast
Yeah.
because there are so many traumatized souls that need to let their pandemic survivors know that they are okay.
Yes,
So anybody
absolutely.
out there who has gifts or getting a nudge, just pray that the communication is clear and discern how much you want to be a part of the cleanup effort of this
Mm,
pandemic.
mm. Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you to everyone watching. Um, this has been Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary, and I hope you'll join us next time for another super interesting interview. Um, If you did enjoy this, of course, give it a thumbs up. And if you like this type of content, please subscribe to the channel. And then you can hit the bell icon as well to be alerted of future videos. And I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening wherever you are on the planet or off the planet. And we'll see you all next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.